Following a disappointing 5-loss season in 2014, Gus Malzahn and his coaching staff went to work on the recruiting trail and closed extremely well in that final day or two to lift what was going to be a very solid class by SEC standards, great class across the country, into an elite class. We bring in Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation to help us sort through it. Jamie, let's first start with what we discussed right before we came on, and that's if you've got a competent coach at Auburn, you're going to bring in a top 15 or 20 class. I don't think there's any question about that. There's just too much talent around the SEC and too much name brand at Auburn. But Gene Chizik did well, and now Gus Malzahn doing well and closing out with really elite classes the last couple of years.
That's something that you said that has really taken off the last several years for Auburn University, and they have closed out pretty well since Gene Chizik came to Auburn, and that's something that maybe the Trooper Taylor, Curtis Looper effect, you saw some excellent recruiters that were good closers because they were able to create good relationships with these young men and relate to them on a different level than maybe some of your coaches do, and that's kind of carried over with this Auburn staff that's in place now, as Damian Craig is that kind of guy that can really relate to these young men, and they see him more as an older brother figure in a way because he's not that far off of their age. He played a skill position at a high level, and he's somebody that they're able to relate to, and I think that along with a combination of other things with the Auburn staff, if you look around, numerous guys on that staff have been recruiting coordinators at big SEC schools, and that's something that they've used as a benefit to them and their staff on signing day, especially closing out as strongly as they have.
Hey, Jamie, before we break down this class, not trying to generalize way too much, but it seems as though while on game day and maybe even preparation for the game, a lot of the best coaches across America, whether it's head coaches, coordinators, positional coaches, have some years behind them. When it comes to recruiting, you need some fresh blood, some guys that are really going to pound the pavement. Maybe it takes some newer guys, some younger guys, as you allude to, number one, to relate to some of these kids, and number two, just to have the sheer energy and drive to do it day after day after day, and the traveling and the grunt work that it takes to get after these kids.
And that's correct. And I think Auburn has at least 3 coaches that do a fantastic job of being able to relate to today's young man, one being Damian Craig that we mentioned. He's just fantastic all the way around. He's a very well-rounded football coach and can really relate to anyone. Brett Lashley, the offensive coordinator, is another very young guy. He's just about 30 years old, and he's somebody that these guys can relate to as well. And when you flip over to the other side of the ball, Travarius Robinson, who came back to Auburn University where he had played his college football, gone on to coach at several schools, most recently Florida, is another guy that they're able to look at and realize that he's just not that far off of where they are in the age spectrum, but they still have that respect for him, and those guys are able to relate to those 3 coaches quite well. Then when you look on the other side, you've got some coaches that's been doing this a very long time at a high level in the recruiting game. 2 guys that come to mind are Rodney Garner, the defensive line coach, who is a no-nonsense type of guy, but he's always been considered an ace recruiter, and Lance Thompson, who they have just hired from the University of Alabama, comes in to coach linebackers, and he's another guy, even though he's somewhat of a no-nonsense type approach, he's always been considered a very high-level recruiter wherever he's been in the SEC, so they have a very good mix of what they present in the recruiting game when you talk about the coaching staff at Auburn.
We're joined by Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation. I advise and encourage you, if you want to get a full-length discussion on this Auburn class, to check out our previous video post a couple weeks ago, just a couple days before National Signing Day, because we may not get to some of these players as we did at the time when we had a pretty good handle on what that class was going to look like, because we want to steer it more toward what does this class do for the 2015 team and beyond. So it's one thing, Jamie, as we've discussed in the past, and you've eloquently explained for us, it's one thing to say, hey, we got 5 top 100 players, we've got this, we've got that, we're rated here, but to basically take those positional players and apply it to the current roster and see where it could really help out, or maybe where it's dispositioned to help you and it's not applicable to the current needs? Can you take this recruiting class and kind of fill it in regards to what's needed for this Auburn team in 2015 and beyond that?
I think the easiest thing to dissect in the Auburn class, and it was the easiest thing to notice as a big area of need, was defensive end, particularly in the pass rushing department of that position. And it's so easy to talk about Byron Cowart. He is pretty much the consensus #1 player in America. He comes into an SEC team at their biggest position of need. So that's like a softball home run to toss up the Cowart conversation there. He's a 6'3", 255, 260-pound guy who is ready to play the position just about at any conference when you look at his build and his explosiveness. Now, you don't know how that's going to relate when it comes to the playbook and the things that you're trying to teach them in the defensive concept. That's something we'll find out more about Byron in August and September. But he has all the tools to be extremely successful early at Auburn, and defensive end is a position that was absolutely of need. Another kid at that position is Prince Tega from Edgewood Academy. He was kind of, before everything happened with Cowart on signing day, Tega was the story at Auburn University because of the background in which he came from at 6'8", 250 pounds, and being able to run a legitimate 4.6 40. It's easy to think that he could come in and make an impact early, but the broken leg will set him back a little bit. But more than that, his lack of total football knowledge and understanding is something that's going to take him a couple of years to develop. But that's something that Cowart really helps with in getting Carl Lawson back healthy. Lawson and Cowart and a couple of other young men that are there can really try to hold down that defensive end position and give Prince Tega a couple of years to produce what they think he may be able to be, which is very, very special if things come along.
Right, Jamie. Looking at the lineup of commits, I believe we've got 27 here signed on National Signing Day in total, some of them early enrollees. You talked about Cowart. You talked about Tega. Of course, Tega is going to be extremely interesting and intriguing to see on down the line. We may not see a whole lot of them initially. Are there any other guys besides who we've named here that you're just, and it may not even be a top recruit, but you're just kind of intrigued to see on the field and see perform here coming up?
You know, if you stay on the defensive side of the ball, John Tavius Johnson from Lincoln High School in Alabama is a 3 or 4A program here in the state. He's a young man that was a somewhat unheralded as a junior. He was about 350 or 360 pounds. He's a kid that's lost some weight and is really nimble, and he's coming into a position of need for Auburn, as the defensive tackle position is now going to be very thin as far as their depth goes. And he's a kid that could come in and play early because he is very big, very nimble. Maurice Swain is another guy from nearby Troup County High School, comes in from the junior college ranks. Another somewhat unheralded young man, but watching him in high school, he was very athletic and can get the job done. Defensively, the cornerbacks that they signed was very important. Cornerback depth is going to be an issue at Auburn over the next year or two, as well as the linebacker position. They have 4 senior linebackers returning this year and 1 freshman that played a good bit in Trey Williams. However, if you look behind that, once the 4 seniors do leave, your depth has been depleted. So this linebacker class was extremely important for Auburn University this year and beyond. When you talk about Jeffrey Holland and Richard McBride as being the centerpieces of that group, the Atkinson kid, I believe he will move to a safety position and be a very, very much an enforcer type at the safety position, or he could come back to the outside linebacker spot later, somewhat akin to Darren Bates, for Auburn fans, as a guy that started off at safety, came to outside linebacker, did a really good job for Auburn later in his career, and has been with the St. Louis Rams for several years on their special teams.
Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation, rounding out the Auburn 2015 class that rates, again, by most services in the top 5 in the country. Jamie, hopefully we can flag you down when we get close to spring practice and size this thing up at that point?
I think that would be a very good time to look at some other things with Auburn because they have several early enrollees. Tim Irving, a cousin of Michael Irving, is a guy that they stole late in the process that is in early and is interesting because of his stature. He's only about 5'8", but he's about 190 pounds at the safety position and makes you think a little bit of Bob Sanders back there. He's very aggressive and very flamboyant in a way because he has so much confidence, and he's a kid that'll be fun to watch. And Chandler Cox, the kid that we mentioned, is so big and strong coming in. He's already enrolled. He's going to get a chance to play that fullback position at about 225 pounds. He's already physically developed to the point to where he can probably handle that beating and that grind and see if they can't replace Jay Prosh, who they so sorely missed this past season. And I think all Auburn fans are extremely excited to see what Javon Robinson does at the tailback position. He's somebody that Auburn people were very excited about several years ago coming out of Tennessee. They didn't get to have him the first time around, and now he's back. So that's something to take a look at. And one more to watch is Jason Smith. He comes in from the junior college ranks. He signed with Auburn out of high school from McGill-Tulane in Mobile. He is somebody that some people say is a wide receiver, some say he's a quarterback. He's a very talented kid, going to get a shot at quarterback to begin with, but may move to the wide receiver position if he's not able to beat out Jeremy Johnson, and does provide some depth at wide receiver. And he did move to wide receiver for one game in his career, which was the Mississippi-Alabama All-Star game, and he just happened to win the MVP against all of those guys that were going to compete at high level. And after only one game at the position, 3 days of practice, he won the MVP at wide receiver, so he's somebody to watch out for.
All right, his site is prepsnation.com. Check him out there, and also on Twitter if you look up Jamie Hancock or Preps Nation. Jamie, we always appreciate the breakdown on the personnel, and again, can't wait to have you back.
I appreciate it, Mark. It's always a pleasure.